Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my AM reading for Saturday, March 5th, 2022. I'm not going to even pretend that it's Friday this time around. There's no point, because the major reason I waited till now to film this is because I wanted to officially finish my February reading, which technically meant finish all the books I started in February, which I just did this morning in time to write the final review and get up my literary newsletter. I make a literary newsletter on my blog near the beginning of every month, where I have snippets of the Goodreads reviews of all the books I read that month. I also have bookish news that caught my fancy. I have a book pick. I have a book quote. I have one of these videos, and etc. So now I can link that video down below. I really do prefer to wait a week into the new month to do a Friday Reads video to basically catch up, because at the beginning of each month I'm basically finishing up the reading from the month before, and I haven't gotten that far into anything new and Marchy yet. But I decided this time around that I really did want to start these AM reading videos near the beginning of the month because I also use these videos to kind of guilt myself, nudge myself perhaps more kindly into reading my BookTube Prize videos in a timely fashion, and the BookTube Prize will be ending, the Octafinals round will be ending at the end of this month, so I definitely have to have all of my reading for that prize finished by then, so the sooner the better. So anyway, I will start these videos as I have ever since last May, where I've been slowly eking through this collection of Dorothy Parker's short stories, reading one per AM reading video and discussing it with you all. I am up to Advice for the Little Peyton Girl, which Parker published in 1933. It's another sort of parody or satire, I suppose. It's kind of strong words, but basically we have these two characters, two women in this case. I think one's an older woman, or at least somewhat older, but they're both very obviously unmarried. The little Peyton girl, or Sylvie, is actually 19, and thus begins my sense of distance from the social norms of Parker's time period, because this entire story is about how women relate to men, and the way these women relate to men is obsessing over them. Absolutely obsessing over getting their time and attention and love, and freaking out whenever they don't call or get in touch in a timely fashion. And so little Miss Peyton, who is in fact 19, goes to speak to Miss Marion about it, and Miss Marion gives her, I guess, sound cultural advice about, don't come off as desperate and needy. They won't respond well to that, and you won't get the relationship you want, which I guess on its surface seems fair, but I feel like some of Sylvie or Little Miss Peyton's complaints about this guy kind of standing her up feel legitimate. Like maybe, if you don't want to talk to someone for 2 weeks, call off the relationship or whatever. I don't know. I get defensive. The whole thing makes me defensive. But of course, the point of this story is to say that Miss Marion gives this wonderful advice about how not to take things too personally, don't get too emotional, heaven forbid. Don't pound your, guy friend, at work or anywhere else. Don't assume that the other people, especially women in his life, are against you. And then, of course, she goes ahead, and once Sylvie leaves, she does all of that herself and is constantly, like, over and over again, calling some guy on the phone and freaking out with her secretary. So it's a bit over the top in terms of, people don't take the advice they dish out. And I just can't help but think about how depressing it is, this social interaction that Parker has set up, this desperation, which always makes the women look bad. Many women, in order to keep the lives in which they're accustomed to growing up, would have to marry a dude who can get the proper job and that sort of thing. I don't know. I just feel like this is entrapment. That's what the 30s feel like to me in terms of what it's like for women. It just feels like major entrapment. Speaking of the idealized past, we have The Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles, which is the book I was trying desperately to finish all this week in order to get my February stuff wrapped up and my March stuff, going. And usually I don't talk about my February reads in a March am reading video, but it is the only official book I've officially finished, yada yada, so I guess I should give a little bit of my thoughts about this. This book is in fact a BookTube prize book, but I'm not reading it as a judge. It's not in my group. I'm in fact reading it for a book club with my mom and aunties, so I feel like I can give some thoughts on it, and basically I didn't like it that much. It takes place over 10 days in June 1954 when one of the characters, Emmett, an 18-year-old young man, comes home to a small town in Nebraska after spending some time in a juvenile facility work camp after committing manslaughter. I don't know, it was at the county fair or something, and some guy started talking smack to him, and he got mad, and he hit him, and the guy fell, wrong place, wrong time, and ended up dead. And otherwise, Emmett is a ridiculously upstanding citizen, and everything about the man he killed, or the young boy, or whoever, probably the same age as him, that he killed, is like a complete schmuck, So it almost feels like he should get a medal instead of go to prison for it. But he's too upstanding, obviously, and everything he does is about him being upstanding in the wake of his crime. And he's gone from drama to drama because his father's dead, his farm is foreclosed on, so he and his 8-year-old brother Billy have to get out of town quickly. Anyway, and he has this idea about like flipping houses, and his brother has ideas about tracking their mother down, who 8 years earlier traveled across the Lincoln Highway to California. And Emmett doesn't necessarily feel much about that, but he does feel like, well, if Billy wants to go to California, it actually is a decent place to flip houses. So, we're going to go do that and like take this idealized road trip down the first major highway in the U.S. that, starts in New York and goes to San Francisco. And it's about, bridging the country together, and so modern and idealistic, and about what it means to, be alive on the road, except really that doesn't happen much in this story, despite what the cover tells you, because turns out that two of Emmett's former, roommates in the juvenile facility hitched an illegal ride out of the facility, and they're friendly with Emmett, they like him, but they also really want his car to go to New York to settle their own business without his permission. So most of this sprawling narrative is this huge cat and mouse game about Emmett and Billy trying to track them down. I felt like everybody in this was a bit too much of a caricature. It goes from being, the idealistic, wow, the country is, banded together on this, this highway that links us all together, to sort of a modern day hero's journey. Because Billy is taken with this sort of compendium of heroes and myth makers, and like some of them are fictional and some of them are real, people who've done great deeds, and what is your story going to be, young man? And so basically this is the story, I guess, for Billy, even though, his goal is to find his mother, and there is no redemptive end in that direction, because they end up going the other way, and I guess getting embroiled with, Emmett's old friends and new people along the road, and it's all just too caricature-y. And, even like they meet up with a African-American man who, is a vagabond on freight trains, and Billy sells him the tale that he's named after Odysseus, and, his horrible journey of like looking for his wife and son is almost to an end, and it's just over the top romanticism for me. I'm a 21st century reader. I want complex human characters, and I just feel like this book didn't deliver. It, was self-indulgent in this crazy length. It had a ridiculous, sudden, dramatic ending. I don't know. It was not necessarily for me. Maybe I'll feel differently after the book club, but that'll be in a couple weeks. So there we have it. The first book I started in March is this one, an audio book. It's Tiamat'S Wrath by James S. A. Corey. I'm about 77% through as of right now. This is the 8th and penultimate novel in the Expanse series, a science fiction series that if you've been on my channel, you might have heard me obsessing about a lot. I've been reading the books ever since last year, but I've been obsessed with the show for even longer, and the final season of the show just aired a couple of months ago, but actually the final trilogy of the books at the moment is not getting an adaptation, and that's what I'm reading right now. I'm continuing on with the story. We are in fact 30 years in the future from the events of the television show and the first 6 books. We are in this sort of almost epic fantasy-esque sort of world with an evil empire of sorts. We had already been dealing with more, I feel like, relatable politics in terms of geopolitical stuff, except just on a broader scale with Earth and Mars and then the asteroid belt, because that's where people have expanded to. But the Empire, in fact, comes from a completely alien world, although it is humans. We have expanded greatly in the 24th century due to some shocking alien technology that has opened some doors for us, and we keep on messing with it, even though we're not quite sure what's going on there, and it could quite possibly be far more powerful than we think it is. That seems to be a major theme, especially of this ridiculous Laconian empire and the types of tests that they're running and the empire they're trying to forge. I admit I had some trouble with the idea of the empire in the last book I read, the 7th book, and the way that it tried to force itself onto, its former people in the, the belt and the Mars and Earth. I just felt like it didn't make much sense given the geopolitical stuff that came before it. But that was before Russia went ahead and decided to do an invasion of Ukraine, despite huge condemnation from the rest of the world. So I feel like I should give more of a pass for hubris and stupidity, and that the authors who comprised James S. A. Corey knew what they were talking about. And I'm also, it was kind of a slow start to the story because we had a 30-year gap, but now, of course, we're in the middle of the action. And my emotions are running high again as I follow a lot of characters who I've gotten to know over the course now of 8 books. And all of the new ones are compelling in and of themselves, their backgrounds and everything. The men who, Ty Frank and Daniel Abraham, who write under James S. A. Corey, have always tried to give various points of view for the geopolitical realities they're talking about, in terms of where people are coming from and what they believe, what they're fighting for. We have politicians and military people. We have scientists who know crazy things that I don't understand, and etc. I feel like this is the sort of worldview in a way that I gravitate toward. I mean, it's not relativity where, there's no objective morality, but, everybody is complicated, and, people can have legitimate grievances and legitimate hopes, even when they do legitimately bad things. And, the world can be a complicated place, and these people feel pretty three-dimensional, I think. I do still wish that there was more room for the personal life of the main characters, I think, but in general, it's we're doing okay, and definitely have the present-day stuff to bolster us. I also think it's a little bit impressive that, the majority of the main characters now are like in their 70s, and even though in this future time period, that doesn't mean they're at death's door. They still have, several decades even perhaps in front of them. They're still older, and, their bodies are still telling them, whoa, I'm old now. And so we have kind of a little bit of, maybe a little too much leading into the old grandpa, in my day sort of stuff that, younger characters even mock them over. So a lot of the characters are on the older side of things, and then one of the new characters is in fact a 14-year-old girl. And I would perhaps feel a little wary of two dudes, two dudes who are themselves, in their 50s now, writing a 14-year-old girl, but I actually feel like they do her a fair bit of justice and don't take her storyline for granted or write her off to be, insipid or shallow or something, and they even do have some room in her storyline for, the concerns and obsessions and, interpersonal politics and romances of 14-year-old girls. And so I really, I appreciate that. So yeah, we're not exactly barreling toward a definitive finale quite yet, because this is the second book in the final trilogy, and these three books in particular are much more linked together story-wise. Like, the characters are also en media res, whereas in the first six books, they had a little bit more of a definitive ending, even though the broader stuff was going on, but the next book would find them in a new place, basically. But in this one, it's all kind of one big story, it feels like, to get us to the finale. So I guess I will be checking back next week to tell you how I feel about this ending and what's going to be set up for the final book, Leviathan Falls, which I will be reading as soon as it comes in the holds from my library. Next, I'm just a couple of chapters into this book, The Wandering Jew, Israel and the Search for Jewish Identity by Micah Goodman, translated from the Hebrew by Eylon Levy. I had to check the actual title page. But anyway, this I am reading for my Israel book club, which is meeting quite much sooner than my Mom and Auntie's book club. It's meeting next Tuesday, and I'm hoping to finish this over the weekend. But I guess if I finish Monday or Tuesday, it's not that big of a deal either, but it's a shorter book too, so that's nice. Anyway, this is a book that's different than a lot of the books I've read for my synagogue's Israel book club, which has focused a lot more on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is more about Jewish issues having to do with the Jewish state, and particularly the push and pull between ultra-religious and ultra-secular. When I talked about this, I think in my book haul video, I talked about it as the push and pull between like the ultra-religious and the progressive religious, but that's actually not true. He's focusing more on the extremes of both, although I feel like ultimately progressive Judaism, or, different types of religious Judaism will have to come into play, because I think he is, it seems, trying to find a middle ground between these two extremes. So we started with this sort of broad, general introduction about the positives and negatives of both, like, being over-religious or over-secular. I'm not entirely sure I agree with all of his points about how secular beliefs, for lack of a better word, work, that they're entirely about the individual and that there's no community aspect to be found in them. I don't think that secular people are just a bunch of anarchists walking around, and in fact, there's a lot of people who claim to be secular who find community based on either altruism or other factors. Like, as a geek, I know there's a huge community aspect around the geek culture, even. I guess you could say that religion was sort of the first sense of community that humans came up with, or certainly one of the most long-lasting ones. But I feel like without religion, we still do find types of community. So I don't necessarily agree with all of his broad assertions. I see a bunch of footnotes, and it makes me think about how, I could take the time and make this a much larger reading experience, because I could look at all of the studies or whatever that he links to and see if I come to the same conclusions. I don't think I'm going to do that just because there's so much to read, but it's interesting just to see his viewpoint. We go further into, well, specifically into Israel and how that manifested in terms of the modern state, in terms of the fact that the earliest Zionists were very stridently anti-religious and often, couched things in terms of, Zionism itself and Israel breaking from the negative aspects of being too beholden to the rabbis, like that there were two evils that Jews were facing: the persecution, oppression from Gentiles in Gentile lands, and also persecution from the strictures that the rabbis were forcing on them. But it was always a little bit of a paradox, because most Zionists always wanted to go to Israel and to capitulate on this ancient heritage, which is, after all, embroiled in religion and nostalgia and all of the stuff they're supposed to try to modernize against. But, life is complicated. People are complex. And then it gets more complicated in a way, because there's just no way Israel as a modern state could exist without some sort of capitulation to the ultra-Orthodox themselves, who now make up the rabbinate and are pretty heavily involved in a religious life that touches everyone in Israel, and that, in fact, a lot of secular people are stridently anti-religious, sort of in opposition to the rabbinate. And he made an interesting parallel to the U.S. and how religious a lot of the U.S. is, and how in part it's religious because of the separation of church and state, and that religion hasn't often gotten the chance to be corrupted by state politics because we're stridently in politics, state politics, trying to keep religion out of it. So that, in fact, could make religious authorities more approachable and highlight their positive attributes more. That's an interesting take. I do feel like, again, maybe he's being a little too overly simplistic generally. That I agree. I mean, I could tell that the U.S. does have large swaths of deeply religious culture, but I feel like we're too big and too complicated for that too. There's also large swaths that aren't. But that's not really the point of the book. So I feel like in a way you have to sort of nod away some of his broader, perhaps oversimplified points and focus more on the specific points he's making about Israel and Israeli society. So yeah, I'm just a little bit into it. I do hope to finish it, and when I report back, I'll also hopefully be saying stuff that my book club talks about, which should hopefully also give me even more of a intellectual playground to choose from. I'm basically going to try to siphon off other people's intelligence. And compare and contrast, I suppose, where it stands with my own, but I'm humble. I know that I'm not the most learned person in the room, so certainly my own opinions of what I read count for something, but I'm also eager to learn from the rest of the group. This is an interesting book, I suppose, to read with a synagogue group when there's such a strident anti-religious sort of component. But again, well, my synagogue is a progressive branch, and we are connected with a progressive branch within Israel. So, you know, even in Israel, it's not quite so binary how religion and secularism works. So I'll be eager to get to that part as well. And finally, after all this rambling, I return to the BookTube Prize and to my official ballot. I am judging nonfiction Group E for the octafinals, and I have 3 more books left to go before I can submit my ballot. And so I think I will be starting with this one. This is The 5 Wounds by Kristin Valdez Quade. This is about intergenerational family drama within a Latinx family. It's the shortest book of the 3 I have left to go, so I guess I'm trying to slowly build myself up here. But anyway, that's all I will be saying about this book for now, because as a judge, I'm supposed to keep mum on my opinions until the octafinals ends. The BookTube Prize was started by Robert Barter Hordes in 2019, and we have over 300 judges across the world who are judging the best in literary fiction, nonfiction, and translated fiction that were published in the U.S. last year. So if you want more information about my particular ballot and my first preliminary thoughts on them, or about the BookTube Prize itself, I will leave links down below. So that about covers it for me now. I guess I rambled on more than I hoped to, because I am looking at a battery that is really almost about to die. So I'm just going to go ahead and wrap things up here and say that you will see me next in the next few days for my March page 112 tag. Very exciting tag to add yet another book to my TBR. So stay tuned for that. Otherwise, my plans, other than reading this for the rest of this weekend, is my dad is coming to help me with internet problems that I'm having. My internet is getting splotchy for some reason, going in and out and not working the way it's supposed to, and it's just very confusing and frustrating. So hopefully we can look at that as well. Hopefully I can get this video up. But to do that, I guess I will be signing off for now before this camera officially kicks me off. So yes, I hope you are all enjoying your first 5 days of March. And in the meantime, thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I will see you next time.